everybody. So I am really sorry, but this is going to be a crazy video, and I hope you're going to be able to hear me. But I'm going to try to go ahead and do some of this while I am waiting to help with Chick-fil-A. So there's Mackenzie and Kendall. Everybody say hello. There we go. So today, what I want to talk about is factoring. We are going to have to be able to factor our quadratic functions. And so if we want to factor quadratic functions, we have to be able to factor anything that is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So in order to do this, we're going to start with, we're just going to look at remembering how to factor. If you have factoring a trinomial, something that is in the form of x squared plus 9x plus 20, there are many, many ways to factor a trinomial into two binomials, but I'm a puzzle girl. I'm a puzzle girl so that we have, this is ax squared plus bx plus c, and I'm going to say that my puzzle, something plus something, is always going to equal my b, and something times something is always going to equal my a times c. So they multiply to give you a times c, and they add to give you b. In this particular case, my b is 9, and then they multiply to give me 1 times 20, which is 20. Now, I have to ask myself, what numbers multiply to give me 20? Well, I have 1 times 20, I have 2 times 10, I have 3 doesn't go into 20, but 4 times 5 goes into 20. And ding, 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 that's what I want, 4 and 5. Once I know that 4 plus 5 equals 9, I also know that 4x plus 5x equals 9x. So I can split this middle term. I have x squared plus 4x plus 5x plus 20, and I can group these together. First two group together, second two group together. When I group the first two together, their greatest common factor is x. And so I can factor out the x. That means I'm dividing each of these by x, and that's going to leave me with x squared divided by x is x. 4x divided by x is plus 4. My greatest common factor of 5x plus 20 is 5 times, and if I divide both of these by 5, 5x divided by 5 is x, plus 20 divided by 5 is 4. So what we have at this point is we can see a common factor. What they share is the x plus 4, and what's left over is the x plus 5. So my answer is x plus 4 times x plus 5. Remember, we can use FOIL or the box method to check our answer. If you use FOIL, it's first, outer, inner, last. So x times x is x squared. Outer is x times 5, which is 5x. Inner is 4 times x, which is 4x. And last, it's 4 times 5, which is 20, which does check and give us x squared plus 9x plus 20. Now we're going to be working some more factoring problems in class, but I just want to make sure that all of us are in a good place when it comes to factoring. We must know how to factor polynomials. Let's look at another example. Example number 2. We can have x squared plus 16x plus 64. So I'm still in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So in order to complete my puzzle, something times something equals a times c, and something plus something equals my b. The same somethings are, your somethings have to be the same, I guess is what I should say. So they're going to add to give me 16, and when I multiply 1 times 64, I get 64. Well, I know that 8 times 8 is 64. That should be pretty apparent. And so 8 times 8 being 64, what's 8 plus 8? 16. So that's my trick. I'm going to split this middle term. If 8 plus 8 is 16, 8x plus 8x is equal to 16x. So I'm going to split this into 8x plus 8x plus 64. From here, I'm going to group my first two terms together and group my second two terms together. My greatest common factor of the first two are x, so I can factor that out, and that leaves me with x plus 8. My GCF of the second two is 8, so I can factor out that 8, and if I divide both of these by 8, you are left with x plus 8. What they share is the x plus 8. What's left over is x plus 8. So these are going to be the two binomials that we factor into. I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'll finish this later. Chick-fil-A went well today. Now we're going to do some more factoring. Number 3, if we are going to factor x squared minus 5x minus 24. Once again, it is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. And so we are going to do our puzzle that something plus something is equal to b, and something times something is equal to a times c. My b is negative 5, and my a is 1 times my c, which is negative 24. So that gives me a product of negative 24. Now, I have to think, what are the products of 24? And since my b is negative, 1 is going to be positive and 1, or both are going to be negative. Well, here, if I have a negative a times c, one number has to be negative and the other has to be positive. So if my b is negative 5, that means my larger number has to be negative. My numbers that equal 24 are 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. Now looking at these combinations, if I subtract, the only way I can get a 5 is by using my 3 and my 8. If I want a negative 5, then that means my numbers are going to be negative 8 and 3. Negative 8x plus 3x, plus negative 3x. Oh my goodness, Miss Baker's tired. Let's try that again. Negative 8x plus 3x is equal to negative 5x. And so I can see that they multiply to give me negative 24 and they add to give me negative 5. I can split my middle term into negative 8x plus 3x minus 24. When I group my first two terms and group my second two terms, my greatest common factor in the first two terms is x. And when I factor out that x, I'm left with x minus 8. My greatest common factor of the second two terms is 3. So when I factor out that 3, once again, I'm left with x minus 8. When you factor, if you don't have that common term, that common binomial, then it is not going to factor into two binomials. You have to be able to factor out and have a term that is the same between both sides. So one of my binomials is x minus 8, and my other binomial is going to be x plus 3. And if I want to check myself, I'm going to say x minus 8 times x plus 3. FOIL, FOIL them back together. X times x gives me x squared. Outer, x times 3 gives me 3x. Inner, negative 8x. And last is negative 24. So that'll give me x squared minus 5x minus 24. So it checks. We're good to go. Now there are lots of ways that we can factor. Those are factoring a trinomial. We also sometimes have things that need to factor that look like this. It can still be written as a trinomial. If I wanted to do a, b, and c, I would have an a of 1 because it's ax squared, so I have 1x squared. I don't have a b, so that would have to be 0. And my c would be negative 21. Or sorry, negative 121. This is also, we notice that x squared is a perfect square. And what is 121? Hopefully with your multiplication facts, you can remember that 121 is 11 times 11. And so that is called the difference of squares. The difference of squares is if we have a squared minus b squared, then it is equal to a minus b and a plus b. So we can split this into two binomials. X squared minus 21 is going to be x and x. Square root of 121 is 11 and 11, and then one's going to be plus and one's going to be minus. It doesn't matter which order you write the plus and the minus because of your commutative property. It doesn't matter. X plus 11 times x minus 11 is the same as x minus 11 times x plus 11. And if you FOIL it back together, this is going to be my answer. And if I want to FOIL it to check to make sure I have the right answer, FOIL, first x times x gives me x squared. Outer is going to be negative 11x. My inner is going to be positive 11x. And my last is going to be negative 121. And so those cancel out. And I'm left with x squared minus 121. I really only have time for one more. So I'm going to do one with a coefficient on my x squared that is not 1. I'm going to try negative 3x squared minus 10x plus 8. If I want to, this is ax squared plus bx plus c. So something plus something and something times something. They are going to add to give me negative 10. Sorry, I put that in the wrong place. They add to give me b, which is negative 10, and they multiply to give me a times c. In this case, a times c is negative 3 times 8, which is negative 24. A lot of people forget to pull in that negative 3 when their a is something other than 1. And so if we look at negative 24, 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. How can I get 10 out of any of these numbers? Well, you're going to have to say 12 minus 2 to get 10. If you want a negative 10, you're going to have to say that you've got a negative 12 and 2, if we add those together. So negative 12 plus 2 is negative 10, and negative 12 times 2 is negative 24. We keep our negative 3x squared. Because negative 12 plus 2 is negative 10, negative 12x plus 2x plus 8, they all work to give you negative 10 in the middle, negative 10x. I can put my first two together. which means I have to factor out my greatest common factor.